pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to Films I Should Have Talked About Years Ago. And for this episode in Films I Should Have Talked About Years Ago, or could I just say FISTAYA for short. Well, I never really figured that that would have to be an acronym for it, but you know what? We're just gonna go through with it. So, today's pick that I got is Due Date from 2010. This is yet another big pick out there that I have had requests on before, but I've also been determined to talk about this myself, because especially the fact that I was able to watch this quite some time ago. It's been a while since I last saw it, but hey, you know what? Details are still fresh in my mind. Not quite as much as they would have been back then, but still. Due Date is in fact the story of a soon-to-be parent who has to travel cross-country just to attend the birthing session that would occur in a few days. But upon doing so, trying to get onto a plane, this soon-to-be parent, who's played by Robert Downey Jr., whom you'd already know as Iron Man, pretty much, ends up meeting a stoner who's played by Zach Galifianakis. And this stoner inadvertently causes Robert Downey Jr.'s character to get kicked off the flight for apparently causing a ruckus. Now, as hilarious as that sounds to be, that Robert Downey Jr. apparently is freaking out in this film already, even though a lot of the action hasn't really taken place, it's still important to know that, well, someone like Robert Downey Jr. really was probably not as well known as Iron Man at the time as today, where Jr. is apparently making millions or even billions of dollars by now as an actor. And we can certainly tell you that Downey Jr.'s career is already getting much bigger than it has been. So, in a way, you could say this was a bit of a turning point for Downey Jr. to be outside of the Iron Man costuming and all that good stuff. But anyways, the two end up having a bit of a debatable sort of argument on whether or not they can both go together after Zach Galifianakis goes up and picks up a rental car after also getting booted off the flight, pretty much. Maybe for having possession of marijuana. And this was, of course, before marijuana legalization came into play, but, you know, it still ticks me off. Knowing a misunderstood substance is still going to be lied about for years to come. For what reason? That we might never know. Anyways, they both end up going on the roads, the long, long roads as it pretty much came to be. And quite a big adventure turns out, as they start from one part of the United States and they go all the way down to the other side of the country itself. Inside of a Subaru at first, until Zach Galifianakis ends up crashing it. Also, we gotta mention the part where they spend their first night together. Galifianakis basically goes to another stoner's house and spends a lot of money on pot. Then eventually they have to find a place to spend a night to, and it comes to be that they have to try to find a good motel to be in. But unfortunately they can't afford it. And when they try to go get their credit cards and the like to withdraw cash, apparently the clerk, who is disabled in a wheelchair, ends up kicking their butts. That is also pretty darn funny. We also can't forget to mention the fact that, well, the closest thing that you'd ever have to a sex scene in this film, where Galifianakis is literally, well, man, full-on masturbation on camera. Who would have thought someone would do that? Like, that's kind of embarrassing. Man, that's crazy. Oh, man. But, you know what? The one thing that helped settle this down for me was seeing the French Bulldog Sonny do the same thing. Yeah, literally. A dog is stroking. Literally. That is insane, like right there. Robert Downey Jr., of course, was just as uncomfortable as I am watching this scene. So, I don't even know. Like, well, I guess it just gets even better. Because like I said, they crash the car and Galifianakis gets very, very much yelled at by Robert Downey Jr. So much so, it comes to the point where the dog gets spat on. That's insane. But eventually, an old friend comes by to help, and they end up going ahead and borrow a Land Rover to try to get to their destination on time. But that ends up going wrong too, because at some point in the film, they both end up getting stoned. And they ended up having to, well, turn around on a U-turn because they accidentally get off the highway too soon and end up in Mexico, pretty much. It eventually comes down to a point where Robert Downey Jr. gets arrested and questioned, and the car gets impounded, leaving Galifianakis pretty much behind. But not until the guy improvises. Steals a truck which is connected to the trailer that the Border Patrol was questioning Jr. in, and man, the chaos really ensues. The trailer gets tossed around on the highways like crazy, and everybody's like fumbling around like it's the so-called vomit comet of a lifetime that's just flying on land. Like, that's incredible. Who would have thought something as amazingly intense as this would ever happen on camera? Well, other than Due Date, I haven't really seen anything much freakier than this. Because, hey, those guys could have died in that trailer. But, of course, it's still important to know that, well, all the amazing comedy that's put into this, and not to mention all the rather NSFW sort of nature that unfolds from this, it really gives me a lot of good vibes, but at the same time it gives me a lot of not so good vibes. I can't say that this is a bad film by any means. It's incredible for what it is. A cross-country trip featuring the likes of Iron Man and, well, Zach Galifianakis. This is probably by far the only film that I've known very well of this particular actor, whereas Downey Jr., I could name a whole lot of roles. That's just how big the MCU pretty much is. But it is important to note that, well, by the end of the film, they end up completing their journey. They're both together, and everything seems to be resolved. The birth is witnessed, and, well, Robert Downey Jr. officially becomes a parent in this film. So, a satisfying ending to a rather unbelievably, terrifyingly crazy adventure like this. Man, I don't know about you, but there's really a lot of ways that I could put this together and worked, but why would I, pretty much? So, let's just go ahead and get to the scoring. So, without any further ado, let's go and give this film a scoring, a grand total of 8.5 out of 10. So right then and there, and I really gotta say, this one's quite an impressive film entirely. And I can really tell you from my own perspective especially, that this film has a lot riding on it. But you can also look at it from most other perspectives and also try to adjust to it in a different way. This may not be for everybody, but hey, wins win. I see this as a good film for the year 2010 and also for what it is as a whole. One of the only big examples that I currently see of a film that's centered on cross-country road trips. Pretty much. And that's probably going to cut it right now because I'll probably be going back to one a day. If you want to see more, go down to my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.